I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I turn it now to the facilitators, Dr. Terry Jones.
Good evening, everyone. Kathy, will you take the roll, please?
Team Member Curtis, Team Member Roughton, here. Team Member Bogus, here. Team Member Edwards, here. Team Member Brewer, here. Team Member Weiss, Team Member Risdell, here. Team Member Marion, here. Team Member Broyles, here. Team Member Hood, Team Member Loyal, here. Team Member Sedlak, Team Member Cohn, here. Team Member Helfrey, here. Team Member Hoffman, here. Team Member Lee, Council Member McCutcheon, here. Council Member Stevens,
here.
Okay, there's a copy of the minutes from the August 13th meeting in your packet. Are there any corrections or additions to those minutes? Hearing none, they stand approved. Are there any public comments for the first opportunity to do so? As Chair Loyal's already mentioned, there'll be a second opportunity towards the end of the meeting. And the answer is yes? And reminding all that it's a 5-minute limit on public comments per individual.
Thank you. I hopefully won't take that long. Thank you, everyone, on the TCUT. I made some comments the last meeting, and I will repeat a couple of them and also provide some additional information. My name is Mike Doster. I'm the land use attorney on the development team for Payne Family Homes with respect to the reserve development, the proposed reserve development. As you may know from my comment last time, we've been at this since 2015, and I mention that not by way of complaint, but to underscore the fact that a lot of work has gone into trying to find a solution. We think the reserve plan is the solution. A lot of work has been put in not only by the development team for Payne Family Homes, but by staff, the Planning Commission. We've had a number of meetings, work sessions, and so forth. Payne Family Homes has a dilemma. We have two plans, one called the Ackerley Plan. The other plan is the Reserve Plan, which is on the agenda this evening. The irony is that the Ackerley Plan was supported by staff. Staff recommended approval, but it was pretty clear from the comments we received from Planning Commission that the Ackerley Plan was not favored. So we went back to the drawing board many times and came up with the reserve plan. And I've heard comments from a number of sources about the reserve plan. I've heard comments that range from, this is a far better plan than the Ackerley Plan. There's a lot to like about this plan. And I guess the one that's most favorable is this is what we should be doing. I'm not assigning names to those comments, but that tells us that there is at least receptivity out there to the reserve plan. I don't know that there is any receptivity to the Ackerley Plan. Again, the irony is staff recommended approval on the Ackerley Plan, recommended denial on the reserve plan. So we're hopeful that the reserve plan get some support as we continue to go through this process. We think the reserve plan is a transition plan. And later on, if you need more detail with respect to that plan, with us tonight is Chuck Hulls from Stock and Associates Civil Engineers, and also a special consultant, Tom Cummings. And Tom Cummings can speak better than any of us on our team to the origin and evolution of the reserve plan and what it's trying to achieve. And I say it's a transition plan when I look at it conceptually. If you start with Main Street Crossing to the east, you're at, according to my rough math, you might want to check this with Chuck Hulse later, my rough math, it's 3.7 units per acre. When you move to the reserve plan, it's 2.6 units per acre. And I realize it's an if the property to the west of the site where the reserve plan is proposed is or becomes subject to the transition district, and I understood last time that there seemed to be some building consensus toward 1.5 units per acre. So if you look from east to west, it goes from 3.7 to 2.6 to 1.5. So as you're moving west, you're getting the decrease in density in a transition sense. So with that, I'll answer any questions you might have for me, and then we may speak later on in the meeting.
Yes, in reviewing the Ackerley Place plan that had been submitted by Payne Family Homes, it met the requirements relating to the regulating plan, the neighborhood design standards, and the street network. Although it wasn't a plan that was necessarily favored as Mr. Doster spoke, it did meet the letter of the laws in that regard.
But the reserve plan does not?
There are a number of design standards that are not met. There's an issue with the street network, which involves a number of cul-de-sacs. And so there are a number of items that cause the Department of Planning not to support the reserve plan. But as Mr. Doster has mentioned, there are some on the Planning and Zoning Commission that thought it was a much improved plan to that of Ackerley Place.
So the Ackerley Place and the Reserve, they're both in town center, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, we'll move on. Any other public comments, Kathy?
I took cards in case there's questions later, but
I think we have one from our Packers fan.
I are we accepting cards from Packers fans?
Only if you're...
I couldn't make the soccer meeting, so I'm here.
Well, then we'll accept the sacrifice.
Kathy is an ardent soccer fan. I'm surprised she's here tonight. Jean Vedvig, 16709 Clayton Road. The reason for my comment is that I understand that this commission has been given the task of looking at, I don't actually know if it's given the task of looking at this plan by Ackerley Place and Latitude. I think that, reviewing the regulating plan is the task, and I'm not sure going into specific plans. I think that is more a planning commission responsibility, and it takes the authority and the responsibility and lays it on you, which yours is the review the regulating plan. So that has been my opinion from day one. Vince knows that, and I continue to hold that. Additionally, on the location of the, I don't know how to describe it, the property at 109 and where the Ackerley Place is. I think that having that workplace along 109 continued is a benefit for the community. When we look at the Wildwood Square, which is adjacent to the YMCA and the community college, I think that shows good development, and in '08 we talked about that, so continuing that on. As I have attended meetings, I have also heard residents of the new developments that have occurred right here off of 109, where all the residential is. And I've heard those folks say, we really like it here, but where are we supposed to walk to? And for that reason, I think we need to continue to have the workplace or commercial, probably not saying commercial, right? But where you have your development that is other than residential along 109. I think it would be a benefit to the community and provide services. But we are never going to be like Eureka or Chesterfield, and that's not what we were intending to be. So with that, I just think those are my opinions, is to maintain some sort of zoning there, our land regulating plan, and also those specific plans. Really, I don't know that we should be, or that this group should be looking at that. That kind of throws you off track too. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for the last speaker? My team members? Yes, Lindsay?
My question regards the topography of the site that was designated for workplace along 109. I know I was driving along there the other day as the road construction's been going on, and there's a fairly steep drop-off as you're driving north. How is that intended to work for entry and exit into a workplace use?
There's two parts to that answer. The first, the city of Wildwood, as you know, is doing improvements on Route 109 at this time. One of those improvements in the overall project is the roundabout at Main Street. So the city is beginning that process of changing that topography by elevating it. The second part of the answer is that when development does occur on the 50-acre site that's now the reserve project, they will have to remove some of the existing grade and push it over to address existing grade. And so there'll be an alteration of the site to create a reasonable ingress-egress off of Route 109.
Hey, John, we might have some more color to add to that too.
Any other comments from the team members or questions? If not, we'll move on to item 4 on the agenda of the Department of Planning, distribution and explanation of the meeting materials.
Thank you, Dr. Jones, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the update team, the Department of Planning has provided for your consideration tonight a number of items in the folder. There are 4 major initiatives, so to speak, on tonight's agenda, and those all relate to our recent discussions. 2 are the proposals that have been forwarded to the team from the Planning and Zoning Commission for consideration, and 1 has been discussed during public comment, the reserve at Wildwood, and the other is the Latitude development on Etherton Road. We also have provided to you a revision of the Neighborhood Edge Transition District. As you know, at our last meeting in August, we spent a great deal of time talking about transitions between existing town center boundaries and those areas that abut that boundary or boundaries. And ultimately, there was feedback provided that led Kathy and I to update that description, and then that is part of our discussion tonight. Additionally, one of the team members, Mr. Roughton, wanted to submit an alternative, and Mr. Roughton provided that to Kathy and I with the request that if it was acceptable, it be forwarded to the team members, which it has been for your consideration. So in that particular instance, we have 2 approaches, so to speak, relating to the Neighborhood Edge Transition District. And then finally, we have information relating to the addition of potential areas to the town center boundary. As you know, the team started with 4 locations, immediately decided 2 of those locations were not suitable, and then for the last few months, we spent time visiting the other 2 areas or alternates, and then also had discussions in our regular meetings. As with every packet we provide an update on our timeline, and then the table that shows the solutions or the actions we've taken relative to our process, which, as you know, began last year. There is one other item that the department would like to identify, and this was provided to you at each of your seats. It is the Town Center Regulating Plan, but it's a different map in many regards, in that any of the areas within Town Center boundary that are shown gray in color, those are areas that have developed in the past and have a stable development associated with it, or are in development now. The rationale is that Deerberg's Town Center, which developed now almost 20 years ago, is a viable use in Town Center and probably will not see a redevelopment opportunity in the near future. So from the perspective of the Town Center Update Team, it's an area that, for the most part, is not one that we'll be talking about for future changes or what may happen at some point in the future. As you can see, when you start looking at all the gray areas within the boundary, there are just a few locations, so to speak, where concentrations of available property exist for consideration of future town center projects. The majority of them are, for the most part, just west of City Hall or between Wildwood Avenue and Etherton Road. I note that the Pond Historic District is an area that shows a substantial amount of development potential or future use. It is an area that is not served currently by sanitary sewers. It's a discussion topic with our city council, but again, there are limitations associated just with the treatment of wastewater in that area. So hopefully this helps kind of frame what's left, what's been developed, and kind of what tasks lie ahead for the team relative to the regulating plan, decisions about expanding town center boundary, etc. That is the packet for tonight. If there are any questions, Kathy or I would be glad to respond to them at this time. Thank you. Well, per the agenda that the chair has approved, we'd like to start with latitude north 38. The rationale being, it is a project that's been forwarded to the team from the Planning and Zoning Commission, but it does not involve the neighborhood edge transition district. It is in the core of town center. It is a regulating plan change with a rezoning request attached to it, and they were the first to be received by the town center update team. And if at all possible, I think we'd like to start there and then follow from that point forward.
Floor is open for comments on the North 38 project.
I have a question, just for the purposes of clarification. The property that is currently would be occupied by North 38 is presently classified regulation as downtown, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and downtown does not provide for any residential occupancies, correct?
It's not intended to. The instance of the Prime, which is the multi-use building just east of the theater, we actually have two land use designations on that property. The ground floor is downtown district, the airspace or the additional 4 stories is neighborhood general.
Okay, but as it sits now, downtown does not provide. Okay,
Typically
so
not.
neighborhood edge or neighborhood general would provide if that was the classification of the landmass, correct?
Yes, sir.
And if that landmass was classified as neighborhood edge or neighborhood general, would the proposal as submitted meet the other criteria within town center?
The department issued a report to the Planning and Zoning Commission stating yes.
Okay, So essentially what we're dealing with the fact is we have a proposal that meets town center criteria, but it sits in a location that does not provide presently for residential development.
Well said, sir.
Thank you. Any questions, discussion?
If I may, if I could just provide a couple of background
Please.
points. As the chair noted, this particular item has been in discussion since June of 2018 at some level here at the city of Wildwood. The Department of Planning had endorsed the regulating plan change in this particular instance, as well as the principles of the design associated with the 12-lot subdivision. In each instance, the Planning and Zoning Commission did not support it. Their concern related to the regulating plan change, and without the regulating plan change, the project couldn't move forward, regardless if every aspect of the neighborhood design standards and the architectural guidelines, etc., were met by it. The department's position, just to summarize, save you hopefully from rereading a lot of pages you may not necessarily want to, is that when Main Street Crossing was approved across the street, a 28-acre development of single-family detached homes on individual lots, there was a discussion at that time about Etherton Road frontage, because Main Street Crossing also had an area of downtown district on its frontage onto Etherton Road. So again, remember, we don't break land use at the street. What's on one side, we mirror on the other. That's always been the policy, and in almost all instances, the practice. The department's position was that when Main Street Crossing was approved, and we required as the city to have lots directly front onto Etherton Road with new homes, that for all intents and purposes, we made a decision about how land use should be on the opposite side of the street. I am not saying that everyone knew that on the Planning and Zoning Commission, nor City Council. It's just from the policy and practice, we don't break land use at the street. The commission's response was understood, but if you look at the most recent map that shows the area that is developed versus not developed with town center uses that we just discussed, you can see that there's not a lot of downtown district left. And so their concern was, if we approve something like this now, we'll miss an opportunity relative to future development in the downtown district. I believe the department has an obligation to the owners of the residences across Etherton Road to advocate for similar land use on the opposite side of the same street. And that is my summary.
Niles, you had a point.
So if it's going to mirror, wouldn't that necessarily mean that the north side of Crestview would also technically become residential development? So are you looking at turning everything that's downtown district that's along Crestview Drive? Is that all going to go to residential?
Not all of Crestview Drive, but I would argue or suggest that north of Crestview Drive, along the extension of Etherton Road to its termination at State Route 100, those properties that front on the east side of Etherton Road, they are now shown as downtown district, and they should be changed as well to a neighborhood edge or neighborhood general district designation. The rationale being, again, in Canberra, we have new single-family detached homes on individual lots fronting the street. And so I just don't see, at least from the department's perspective, approving or retaining downtown district across from new homes. I just don't think that's the best approach.
Wouldn't downtown district abut the new homes, though?
Well, there is a street that separates the two sets of properties, one on the west side of Etherton Road, the other on the east side of Etherton Road. But Etherton Road is 40 feet in width. So those folks that have bought homes along Etherton Road that front onto it directly, so their front doors face the street, what they would see across the road to 40-foot width would be commercial uses potentially in the future.
No, but if we had, if the planning and zoning decides to change the designation from downtown to a neighborhood edge or neighborhood general, like for the N38 edge, okay, and then across the street, like how many properties on the north side would you say would necessarily go to a neighborhood edge as well? Would it start right there on the I don't know, I guess the eastern boundary of the N38?
Yes, I'd say 4. So the little triangle that Kathy's identified, and then the 3 parcels of ground just to its north.
Okay, but then just to the east of those, wouldn't that still be downtown district and commercial use? So we would be putting businesses right next door to, you know, the homes versus across the street.
It's a very good point. It's a point that obviously goes to the heart of the matter. Do you match it depth by depth or width by width, or in this instance, direct frontage across from each other?
Like, I guess my question is, where does the transition start? Because it necessarily has to start somewhere, you know, going from residential to commercial. Where do you see that occurring?
Well, logically, you'd match the depth on each side of Crestview Drive. That's the best approach in the department's opinion. And this goes back to a discussion that was held at the Planning and Zoning Commission as well, and that realistically, does that portion of Crestview Drive, west of City Hall, east of Etherton Road, really lend itself well to downtown district designation? Again, the successful commercial businesses that we've identified in town center and certainly elsewhere across the region, there is 2 main components: traffic counts and substantial traffic counts. Not just, let's say, 5,000 vehicles a day, but much more. And then visibility. Then the corollary or the additional item is access. How do you get to it? And all of the Crestview properties present that problem. They don't, even with Main Street extension, I would suggest that the traffic volumes are never going to reach a level of Route 109 or Route 100, where we do have successful commercial development. I will also, for the most part, state that the visibility is obstructed. Because again, there's Route 100 with limited access, and the design that was used when it was constructed doesn't necessarily make the properties as visible as one might expect. And then you'd have to argue, do you put the front of your building toward Route 100 and the back toward Crestview so people can see it better and know what you're doing? Or is it the back of the buildings toward Route 100? And those typically aren't the best looking portions of the building, although we would argue we could make that a 360-degree building. It looks good on all 4 sides, period.
Right. And then what about the 6 acres that's next to City Hall? How would basically turning everything that is commercial zone downtown district, which, you know, the concept plan from everything that I've heard is for a village green, which typically is, you know, green space surrounded by businesses, right? Not green space. Would that just become a neighborhood park, basically?
That's a very good question, Councilmember Stevens. One that came up during our interviews of potential consultants for the first phase of our Village Green, which were held today. And both of the consultants brought up the issue of abutting land use or surrounding land use to the Village Green area. What did we anticipate? What does the plan call for now? There's just a litany of, first and foremost, the plan never showed the 6 acres west of City Hall being public space. It showed it as downtown district. The residents in near acres argued vehemently during the development of the town center plan and even during its first update that they wanted to be left alone. They have 3 acre lots. They like it there. Just leave us alone, and that's why it's neighborhood edge. So part of Crestview, the lots on Crestview to the south, abut neighborhood edge, 3 acre development. Across the street is 3 acre development. To the east is commercial. To the west, at least at Etherton Road, west to Route 109 is residential. It's a real mixed bag right now, and I guess the sore thumb that sticks out to me is the downtown designation west of City Hall. It just doesn't seem to work as well as we once hoped, because we made decisions on the west side of Etherton Road for residential, and then we purchased, relatively speaking, 50% of Crestview Drive on the south side, and are going to make it a public space, which is admirable and needed and welcome, but we've broken the land use pattern there, and no one seemed, at the time we were discussing the Village Green and the purchase of the 6 acres, we were losing downtown area. No one seemed concerned about that. It was identified, but we wanted the land because there was just some synergies that existed between City Hall, the parking garage, and the need for green space in town center.
And then just last thing, I don't want to take up any more time, but how would the 6 acres plus, if this were approved for residential development, how would that affect opening up Main Street or, Crestview Drive? Like, would you just get an easement from the development from N38? There wouldn't be a turnaround or anything in there. And then the same thing on the other side for the 6 acres. Just ingress, egress, access. It just wouldn't that necessarily? Wouldn't you have to open up Main Street?
Very much so. I think it's integral to the development of Village Green. Access will be an issue. We can't bring the public in Crestview Drive from the west to the east because it's a private street. We have rights to it, but do we want to share those rights with 36,000 residents while other people live there that basically say it's a private street, and for all intents and purposes it is, which leaves us with one option, using existing access to the west of City Hall to try to get into and out of the Village Green site. One of the conditions that the developer is responsible for with regards to latitude north 38 is he must provide a dedication, an outright gift of land area for future right-of-way purposes. We would do the same. And so the last intervening 3 acre parcel of ground would be the block between a dedication of right-of-way at least wide enough to accommodate a 2-lane road, quite frankly. I mean, we would have the situation where we could build a 2-lane road for public purposes, but it would be next to a private street, which isn't the best case scenario, obviously, and I'm not suggesting that. All I'm saying is, with development, we obtain right-of-way.
Okay, thank you.
Vince and then Ed.
Oh, okay. I'm going to have them put Google Maps up here so we can get some perspective of the scale of this area compared to the buildings in town center, and then what we're dealing with here. The image, I think this, so if you could center it, pull it, drag it down to the, yeah, to the right, and then, yeah. So what we're talking about, you can see Crestview Drive. So the park area is here. Tract of ground that we're looking at is here. You have this much area connect if they designate right of way. The problem with this is that it's, as Joe said, it's a residential development and we have it as downtown. So we would have to do something similar to what we did on the latest project where we had commercial below and then maybe residential above. But then the challenge is, do you put something like that across the street from a residential tract? And we don't think that's an appropriate use. So the reason it's here is that what I think personally is the downtown designation doesn't fit this piece of property, which is as Joe has commented, because we're going to have it. Does not. We will have a hard time, really difficult time getting commercial in here with these long skinny lots, which no commercial entity is going to want to purchase those. It would have to be an assemblage. It would be very difficult to do, and then we would have to acquire the street. So if we can come up with a transition to go from City Hall to the park, another piece of zoning in there, and then work our way to an allowable residential neighborhood edge, I think that provides the transition from City Hall to 109. And the reason it's here is because we can't approve it because of the zoning classification. The only way that would work is if we change this.
So that was,
Go ahead.
was that the exclusive opposition zoning?
It does not meet the
No,
zoning.
but that's why P&Z.
Right. Our job on P&Z is to enforce the ordinance, and that's what Joe's position is. But in this case, it's a fairly decent plan, but it doesn't meet our ordinance. So we either change the ordinance or we say it will not work.
Ed and then Lindsay.
My basic comment is that this property does not lend itself for downtown or commercial. Joe, you brought up some very important factors. The traffic count, the access, the visibility. Those are things that are paramount to make a successful and sustainable commercial development. This does not exist here. And if anyone were to attempt to do it when they acquired the ground and they were to build a commercial, even a multifamily type project, the cost to meet the Architectural Review Board standards and the improvements needed for that would make the rent so high that it would not be able to lease up. So I personally feel, coming from a commercial development background, that this is absolutely not a downtown location, but neighborhood edge would be more of an appropriate use. Access is non-existent. Yeah.
Michael, did you want to comment on that before I go to Lindsay?
Yes, on the access point, anything commercial, you got to have highway access, street access, and this is landlocked. I mean, we are dead center between 109 and the access into town center. And for this to develop will take a very, very long time, and it may never develop. So that's one of the issues that we have to deal with. It's one of the prime pieces of property that we can utilize, but I think we need a phase from what is downtown and then the development that we have on the other side of Ether.
Lindsay?
On the subject of access, if you look at the way that the downtown area has developed west of Taylor Road, there is sort of more of a city block feel to it. And I know we've discussed the depth of the lots on the north side of Crestview multiple times. Would there be any mandate for the extension of Plaza Drive to split those lots and continue that block pattern as it goes farther west?
The original town center plan did indicate exactly what you just described, that additional right-of-way would be dedicated and there would be not just the extension of Main Street, but an extension of Plaza Drive. The idea behind Dewani's plan has always been that frontage adds value, and value is a positive for all parties, the property owner, the developer, and ultimately the user. That did not necessarily ring true to the property owners in town center when Dewani proposed it. And so the group that kind of followed Dewani and ultimately completed the plan decided to do just the backbone streets, that skeleton, so to speak, of the main arterials, and then let development tell us what would be the next best set of streets to follow or access those arterials, collectors, and move on from there. So yes to your question, but it's not shown on the street network map.
How do you want to express your collective advice, team, on this matter?
Dr. Jones, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Vicki.
Okay. Okay, so I just need to be clear. If we talked about changing the zoning for the particular properties along, they're now commercial, along Etherton and to the south of Crestview, what would we consider changing the zoning to? Would it be neighborhood general or neighborhood edge?
It's a good question because across Etherton Road in Main Street Crossing, it's neighborhood edge. Canberry is neighborhood general. So from the perspective of the department, neighborhood edge is the preferable designation. And
So then that begs us to answer the question of the lot in between the town's 6 acres and that. We have to change that zoning as well then.
yes, I believe you have to look at its land use designation. And as Councilmember Stevens noted, I think you also have to look at those properties in the vicinity of latitude north 38, those being on the north side of Crestview, north along Etherton Road to Route 100. And I believe that was one of the reasons, besides what Commissioner Lee has mentioned, is that the Planning and Zoning Commission almost knew immediately this isn't just one change. This may be multiple changes in the general vicinity, and they thought it best to send it to the Town Center Update team so they could look at it from the entirety of the picture, not just from a snapshot or a section of the picture.
So we would be talking about changing 5 lots at the minimum, and then possibly going to the north side of Crestview and changing the designation on those as well.
Yes, ma'am. It's a line of dominoes, and we started that line of dominoes and pushed on the first one when we did Main Street Crossing, and then followed up with Canberry.
So I would just like to say to everyone up here, just for regarding the lots on my comment for the lots on the north side of Crestview would be that, yes, it's zone commercial, but we could also do like what we did here in Town Center at some point if we needed to, and say commercial on the ground floor and residential above. So that was an option. I mean, if we didn't want to go in and reinvent the wheel.
And I could argue you could do it in two approaches. One, what we did with the Prime, downtown on the ground level, and address the airspace for residential purposes. Or the neighborhood general was originally the live-work district. Small retail service on the first floor and residential on subsequent floors above it. And it could be detached single family or it could be attached single family. So you have an alternative approach or alternative approaches in this case. And
Vince?
That was going to be my comment. Would the neighborhood general give us a bit more latitude in the transition from going completely downtown to neighborhood edge, which provided much more reduced commercial, if you will, whereas neighborhood general does have some parameters under which commercial can be utilized in an area like that. It seems like that would be less aggressive than neighborhood edge.
it takes the two extremes, downtown and neighborhood edge, and blends them into a more of a residential district, but with still a commercial component. And if you're wondering, the original Dewani plan had almost the entirety of Etherton Road neighborhood general along both sides of the frontages.
Dan? And then Deborah?
Would it be fair for this team to address the zoning change and leave the design parameters for this particular property with P&Z?
I would concur with the chief. Chief said yes. I'm not going to argue with him.
Okay, so does that take a motion or whatever?
I think that plays into what P&Z had said, was that their concern was the proposal did not meet the parameters of the zoning. So if we allowed for some zoning, then they can go back to the issue of the proposal.
And that's fine. What I don't want to do is slap the gavel and say, okay, this thing's approved. I mean, P&Z, okay, exactly.
Let me ask P&Z, does that seem reasonable for this body to?
No.
Yeah.
We're talking about a regulating plan and a change to it. If latitude.
Ed, would you put your mic?
If it fits in it, that's one thing. If it doesn't matter. We're just talking about a regulating plan. P&Z will determine that.
I think we were asked to look at the plan.
Yeah, we were.
But I think it's a better.
It's not really this
Exactly.
panel's decision to make.
I think we need to make that clear. And once that's clarified, we're good to go.
I want to clarify something here.
Michael?
Yeah, we are recommending to planning and zoning and council of changes. We don't actually make the change. It's just a recommendation. So if you want to recommend a zoning change, then that comes back to us, and then it goes on to council before we could ever do anything.
And that's the thought process.
But addressing the regulatory plan was part of our charge.
Very much so.
Deborah?
Yeah, Joe, on both sides of Crestview Drive are homes currently, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And they're 3-acre lots.
Yes, ma'am. Some are, the ones on the north side, there may be a couple that are less than 3 acres, but generally speaking, they're 3 acres.
So why was this designated downtown district in the first place?
The designation to downtown district occurred in the first update, which was completed by the Planning and Zoning Commission in 2010. And the thought was, we had downtown district kind of sporadically placed throughout town center boundary. We had it over at Schnucks Wildwood Crossing, we had it here near Deerbergs, we had it on Main Street, we had some out at Route 109, et cetera, et cetera. And the thought was, do we want all these like nodes, or do we want to kind of put all of our eggs in one basket? So the thought was, let's put all of our eggs in one basket. The distance from Taylor Road to Etherton Road on Main Street, Crestview Drive, is approximately a quarter mile long. And so a lot of people talked, that's about the distance of Delmar Boulevard in the loop. And so if that works, this be a great goal to try to achieve. Create something, a place, a very special place. The difference is obviously Delmar Boulevard has substantial traffic counts, substantially greater residential densities, and do not have limited access highway as part of its frontage. So, like I say, it's just,
my confusion is it's residential. And if it's residential, how can it be downtown at the same time? Because there are houses there.
Well, it's a future land use designation, so that if somebody were to come along, a builder, a developer, an interested party, and said, I'm interested in proposing commercial, we would say it's consistent with the regulating plan, but you need to rezone. The carrot to the owners is that typically residential property will generate more revenue to you than residential. For example, commercial property at one time was selling for anywhere from $6 to $8 a square foot in town center. Residential was selling for $2 to $3 a square foot. So what we told the property owners is there's a benefit to being designated downtown district because it could mean more money if you sell your property. But at the end of the day, there just seems to be a disconnect that the department struggles with right now. It's not an easy decision. I know it isn't.
Recognizing that any motion would just say recommendation is part of this team's recommendation. Is anybody ready to make a motion?
Go ahead.
Niles? Well, Lindsay, okay.
The question I have is a little bit more general and less specific, Joe. As we're making a recommendation for multiple years and looking out over the future of development, this is the only remaining area for downtown. Is there any concern that limiting the density of development would limit the growth of the city over the long term? So is there any concern that if we were to turn this into a neighborhood, that there would not be sufficient space for downtown development?
That was the crux of the Planning and Zoning Commission's argument that led to the denial. Are we being too short-sighted and looking at the bird in hand right now versus thinking, let's wait and see? And
Niles?
So on the N38 proposal, on the east side of the proposal, there is a detention pond, detention area. How wide is that? Do you know? About? Tony, do you know?
it's 40 feet. And under the department's recommendation that was presented to the commission, we required that to be underground detention so that the area on top could be public space. So they could use it for passive recreation and even to a certain extent some active recreation.
Okay. And then how does that 40 feet relate to just the transition going from residential to commercial? Because there would still be a commercial lot just on the other side of the detention pond, and then the 6 acres from the city.
Well, certainly from the department's perspective, the more distance or the more buffer you can provide between two uses, the better. But 40 feet is better than 20 feet, obviously. So I would just say that the design took into account trying to address that transition. That's why the site is relatively flat. I don't think necessarily the detention structure needed to be there at that exact location, but it worked best there to do several functions.
Okay.
Yes, Elizabeth?
Not sure I know how to work this. I got it? I would like to address something that Lindsay said about being, she didn't use the word short-sighted. However, I've lived in Wildwood for 31 years, so I'm very familiar with the progress of what the city has made. We don't know the demand to live here in the future. We hope that it's great. And we have lots of acreages past 109. And as Lindsay said, I don't know where we're going to expand and be disjointed if we don't move in a direction toward 109 through Crestview. That's one statement. And the second statement is I keep looking at these long and narrow pieces of property on the north side of Crestview. And I'm picturing going down to Chesterfield Valley. And there's a lot of commercial there that you have to drive back into, and with a little direction on the buildings and numbers, you could utilize, in my estimation, you could utilize, if the roads were available there from Crestview or Main Street north, if they were widened, and the commercial could be facing that road, or however many roads you had in there, particularly, how many, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 to 5 lots there. So no, you wouldn't have it on facing Main Street. You wouldn't have it facing as it does on Manchester Road. But you don't always need a billboard up or a sign up to bring residents in for commercial reasons or office buildings. So I think that's a thought that we need to consider, because once this property is going to be neighborhood edge or neighborhood general, I think it's going to be detrimental to our green space, our village green.
The moderator would welcome a motion at this point, so we can then focus on your vote or discussion of it and then vote on that motion.
My motion will be to change the regulating designation to neighborhood general. The parcels, not only the ones that have 38, but also the ones that continue on a northern boundary from the eastern edge of latitude 38. Does that make sense? So it's essentially 2 in from Atherton Road on the north side of Crestview as well. And also the 2 lots that are south of latitude 38. So essentially it'd be an entire bordering block of.
And so the 2 directly to the north and the 4 to the west along Clifton.
Want to stand up?
Yeah, essentially from this line straight up.
Right here.
Yeah.
So this one.
Yeah, everything to the west, and then include these 2 as well. That's the area I'm speaking about.
Is there a second to the motion?
To change to neighborhood general.
Clarify, they're not extending the neighborhood general line currently exists, but rather jogging it along the property.
Lindsay, I'm sorry, I don't know.
No.
What I would say is,
So there's a neighborhood general line here that
Correct.
subdivides these lots. What you're proposing is a jog.
correct, that entire occupancy.
Is there a second to Vince's motion?
Just the eastern boundary of latitude 38.
To the west or to the...
No, to the east. So essentially, from here north,
Yeah, and then over to...
and then west to Atherton.
That's right.
So there's 10 properties total. So it's in his motion. It's the 6 properties north of Crestview, 4 that front on the east side of Atherton, and then the next 2 here.
I didn't
It
address that.
includes the 2 that are the subject side of
This
latitude
one,
north
right?
38 and these 2 parcels south of that. Total
I thought we
10
were
properties
just
from downtown to neighborhood.
Is the motion clear in terms of the properties
I think
affected?
you need to restate it again, and let's count those lots.
Okay, so
Even
you're
though you're
suggesting
saying
the
it goes
entire
straight
area.
north, we still need to count the lots on the south
I
side.
hear you. There are 6 properties
Oh, neighborhood
north
general and then
of
neighborhood edge.
Crestview in the downtown district that he's proposing the motion for neighborhood general. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the 4 properties south of Crestview, including the 2 subject sites and 3.
So we are going to leave the one lot between that and the city's 6 acres, we're going to leave that commercial?
It wasn't included, so we can do it.
Well, I mean, it doesn't, I shouldn't say that. In my mind, it doesn't make sense. I mean, let me reassess in my own head before I spew it out.
It's logical from the standpoint of same land use across the abutting street. So the depth of the change is mirrored on the north side as it is shown on the south. And that remaining parcel on the south side that's either not part of latitude North 38 or owned by the city would be consistent with the remaining downtown district on the north side of Crestview, east to town center.
Did you wish to propose an amendment, Vicki?
No, I was just trying to get...
Joe, you've always talked about, from the beginning of this whole town center thing, that you have taken into account the residents' desires. You even said it tonight that there was I've forgotten which one you pointed out, that they didn't want that designation, and so you didn't do it. There are some plots here where they want a change, right? That's, I thought, the core of the question. Do you know if the owners of these other plots that we're suddenly adding in to get to whatever it is, 10 or something, do they have any feelings that they've ever evidenced about being in town center or changing a designation or anything else?
Well, I believe there's a couple of the property owners here that live on the north side of Crestview Drive, at least one I know of, Mr. Smith, Virgil Smith. And Kathy just noted that one of those property owners where the arrow is pointing sent an email last month.
I'm sorry, I don't recall which parcel, but they fronted Efferson Road and they wanted.
So to answer your question, the ramification of the motion is substantial. It takes commercial designated property to neighborhood general, which could include a component of commercial, but not at the level or intensity as the downtown district. Will they like it? I don't know. But certainly if the motion were to be passed, it's just a step in this process. We would contact each of those owners and ask them directly and then provide you the feedback. Again, this is a motion on a specific question, but at the end of this process, you'll be given the full document. And if something doesn't seem right then, it's an opportunity to readdress it if you choose.
Deborah?
So if we do neighborhood edge general, which I'm not even quite sure where that is, but in the middle of that, still going to remain downtown, correct?
Yes, there'll be a parcel between latitude North 38 and the city's public holdings that would remain downtown district.
On both sides of Crestview.
Yes.
Vicki?
Joe, you said that there was someone on the north side of Crestview that is actually here. Would it be appropriate that we could ask that person their thoughts?
I would defer to the chair.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Thanks, Joe. Hi, my name's Virgil Schmidt. I've lived on Crestview for 60 years. I built the house. But yeah, there's 9 houses on Crestview. Out of the 9 houses, 4 of them have renters in them. That should tell you a lot. There's for sale signs on Crestview for the last 15 years. Nobody's come knock on my door. My house is not for sale. I have to live somewhere. But anyway, the commercial is dead. Everybody goes to Amazon. Don't go look at these mom and pop stores. They're not there. They're not going to come back. Because you drive down the street, you see everybody's got a box on their front door delivered by Amazon. You know, it's dead. Look at what's happened in town center here in the last 10 years. Joe will attest what's been built. The City Hall, Stonecrest, and maybe the Prime. That's it. Nothing else happening. You know, we're locked in. My kids, I know, want me out of there, but I'm going to stay for a while, okay? I'm glad to answer any questions, everybody, you know, to what's happening.
Here's Mr. Smith.
It's a lot in the middle, about where the V is on Crestview.
Okay.
It's 4 houses to the left and 4 houses up, right in the center. Yeah. You know, whatever. Yeah. Yeah. No. I wish you would change the one next door, the Holidays next door to where the city owns the two. If you're going to change this, I wish you should. I wish you would change that one also. That would help them. There's been for sale for time now. They took the sign down. I'm glad they did. I don't have to look at that big sign anymore. Yes, in between. Yeah. And that's the kids are living there. I call it a rental house. You know, because the holidays are gone. You know. Thank you.
Virgil, I just had one question.
Yes.
Have you spoke to your neighbors about opening up Main Street? Like, what are their thoughts on getting that through?
It's like half and half. The renters don't care. The ones that are renting there, they don't care because they don't pay their dues. You know, and most of the other people on the street don't pay. You know, it's a private street. It's got a deed to it. We have paid tax on that particular street every year. We have to maintain it, and I know it needs maintenance now, but we don't have the $12,000 to repave it. Yeah, so we're just going to leave it go like it is. You know, we try to keep our grass cut, keep things looking nice because we like living there. So.
Any more questions of Mr. Schmidt?
I also have a question. You mentioned there are a large number of renters. What percentage in this area would you say are owner occupants, like yourself?
Well, it's 5 houses owner occupied. There's 5 houses. There's 9 homes totally. Mm-hmm. You know, and there's 5 of them are owner occupied, and the other 4 are occupied renters. So it's 4 and 5, be 9. Is that the question?
It is. I was thinking you mentioned a larger number of renters.
It's 4.
Okay.
4 renters, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Vicki?
So, Mr. Schmidt, are you stating that you would prefer to have the lots on the north side of Crestview rezoned?
Oh, we'd love to have it rezoned down because it's not going to go commercial. It's not there. It hasn't been there for years. There's nobody knocking on my door wanting to build something.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming up and letting me put you on the spot.
Okay. Did Deborah have a question?
That was the same question.
Okay. It'd be fine. Give us a little latitude as what we can do. Right now, we're locked in. We can't do anything. You know. Thank you.
Lindsay?
I have a question, but it's not for you, Virgil. It's more for Joe.
Okay.
If in the future, if there is a need for more high-density development, would it be possible to take some of the workplace areas on Old Manchester that are currently unbuilt and change that to a downtown designation that had more street frontage in 10 years?
Certainly. That's a possibility.
Okay.
Everybody keeps saying that commercial is dead. Commercial is dead. Retail is dead. If you look at the land use, the activities listed in commercial, they're not all retail. They don't have to have frontage that people are going to go, oh, I got to go there. you know, it's veterinarian clinics, it's
Office buildings.
office buildings, medical buildings, veterinarian buildings. There's all sorts of other things that are in here, post offices. I mean, what about a library? I don't want a library someday. I mean, there's a number of things that do not rely on people driving by and say, oh, hey, I'm gonna go buy something. Right. But that is all allowed in downtown.
One quick question. Joe, in the paperwork that we were provided last month, it talked about neighborhood edge versus what we're now motion as neighborhood general. Could you address the thoughts associated with the difference between those two? Is the department semi-comfortable with the neighborhood general that this motion states versus what was initially put forward as neighborhood edge?
I think the best answer I can give to your question, Mr. Bogus, is that in the villages at Brightleaf, which is all single-family detached dwellings on individual lots, it's a combination of neighborhood general and neighborhood edge. So the neighborhood general gives you the flexibility to do not only detached, but attached and multiple family. And so again, although you may change it to neighborhood general and think I don't want multiple family on Etherton Road, that would be part of the zoning process to match like uses as best as possible.
So if I can put it in short words, this staff, you and your department are okay with the general versus the neighborhood edge?
Yes.
Any other comments on the motion by the members of the team?
I just have one question. Thank you. Is there any discussion about expanding the motion beyond the parcels I suggested? No.
I still think that you have to give the Village Green a chance for more commercial development around that area. If you change everything to residential around the Village Green, you could end up just ruining that whole concept. So that would be my only addition.
Thank you.
Yes, Elizabeth?
I would agree with everything you said. We've worked really hard over the years to get a village green or a public space in town center area. And not town center, but where we are today. And I would hate to see that go by the wayside. I really like the linear line you have in your proposal. And it would be helpful to know that we could, over time, cultivate with interest. And I agree with you, Terry. No, Terry. Vicky. Terry. About, yes, Amazon is everywhere. But what about a library here? What a great idea. Among other things. Once that land's built on for homes and bicycles are running up and down the streets, it's not going to be what we want, I think, for the future.
What are we missing?
What are we missing?
Well, informationally, a library is not permitted in that.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, but it would be permitted in neighborhood general.
That's a future meeting.
Right, yeah,
You ready to vote on the motion? Do we have a second? Yes, it's been seconded by...
I second it. Could you reread the motion, please?
Yes, it is to modify the regulating plan from downtown district neighborhood general for the subject site, the 2 parcels that make up latitude north 38, as well as 6 properties across to the north of the subject site across Crestview, and the 2 properties south of the subject site.
all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. We can do a roll call if you'd prefer. The team, we'll do a roll call. Kathy?
Everything that we've done so far as a recommendation to go into the final report was done by roll. That's fine.
Let's do a roll call.
Team Member Curtis?
Yes. Aye, whatever.
Team Member Rowden?
Yes.
Team Member Bogus?
Yes.
Team Member Edwards?
Yes.
Team Member Brewer?
Yes.
Team Teammember Risdall,
Yes.
Teammember Marion,
Yes.
Teammember Broyles,
Yes.
Teammember Loyal,
Yes.
Teammember Crum,
Yes.
Teammember Helping,
Yes.
Teammember Hoffman,
No.
Teammember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
No.
Councilmember Stevens.
Yes.
The motion passes.
And just for the purposes of clarification, we did not address latitude 38. We addressed a land use classification for these lots.
Yes, the design of latitude north 38 will be referred back to the Planning and Zoning Commission and ultimately City Council at some point in the future.
So we'll move on to item 6 on the agenda, the discussion of the Neighborhood Edge Transition District.
Again, thank you, Dr. Jones and Mr. Chair. As was noted in the preliminary comments by the department relative to the packet of information, there are two versions of the revised Neighborhood Edge Transition District for consideration tonight. The Department of Planning, Kathy and I, took the comments that were provided at the August meeting and tried as best as possible to integrate them into the previous text to create a suitable document for consideration tonight. Principally, as you can see from the different color font, the red is the additions that were made based upon the discussion. And there were two major additions, so to speak. The first was a concern by the team members that the density, as proposed in the original draft at 2 units per acre, was too great. And that at the most, the team believed that 1 unit per acre would be the maximum. However, there was also a majority of the team members that felt strongly that it should even be less than 1 unit per acre. And so the range that's been provided for consideration is 0.75 to 1 unit per acre. Additionally, there was a good discussion regarding the planned residential development overlay district, the clustering ordinance, so to speak, and its applicability in town center. And so the department attempted to ensure that relative to those design components, the recipe that kind of makes the bread, is that in all instances relating to lot width, depth, setbacks, etc., that the PRD would be potentially used, but it would be guided by best practices relating to environmental protection, stormwater management, and then finally design compliance to new urbanism principles that are set forth within the plan itself. The department believed, both Kathy and I, that there was a need for some qualifiers associated with the planned residential development overlay district, particularly with certain recent applications that have caused substantial concern in the community about tree removal, grading, stormwater runoff. And so based upon that feedback we've gotten over the last few years, that's what prompted the qualifiers associated with the PRD language.
Ask the team how it wants to proceed. One approach would be for somebody to put this as a motion and second it for the purpose of discussion. And for you to, based on your motion, do it or incorporate it as an amendment. The other to deal with them separately, see what happens.
We have the answer. Can we just take a look at that during the conversation part? And then
Or describe what the difference.
Yeah. So, first and foremost, I want to thank Joe and Kathy for all their hard work putting a really good framework together. It's a great structure, it flows, it makes sense, it touches all the bases. The only other part of it where I think our team can add to it is maybe some guardrails or safeguards. And what I mean by that is I know everybody was very concerned about density, and we bumped it to 0.75 to one house per acre. And what does that really mean to everybody? And it means different things to different people. But if you look at the planned residential development overlay, when we talk about lot width, when we talk about lot depth, when we talk about setbacks, those words are in there. And those words specifically talk about areas designed for environmental protection, stormwater management, things like that. The other thing the recommendation includes is spaces for compatible non-residential uses, things like churches, schools, things like that. Well, all of those things, and once we incorporate the non-residential uses, and once we apply the PRD, to Joe's point, we end up significantly clustering the housing development. So we basically are working with what's left. So the recommendation for alternative B is areas designated for environmental protection, stormwater management, and compatible non-residential uses will be excluded from the overall usable area when calculating density, because it's a totally different number and it substantially reduces or increases the density when we consider those things and we cluster the buildings. So if we could go to the next PowerPoint, please. So just a quick example. We all agree that we want to provide a transition area. We want to establish minimum and maximum lot sizes, but what does that mean when we've got a PRD that basically says we can do anything we want? Allow for a narrow range of potentially compatible non-residential uses, parks, churches, schools, childcare, etc. And then, of course, we always want to address all Wildwood building codes and regulations regarding construction, environmental, so on and so forth. So talking about guardrails or talking about safeguards, we want to provide a transition. And the comment is implement a holistic plan that incorporates the entire transition area versus a street buffer. We can do a number of things. We can say 1 acre per house, and the whole development's that way. I've heard recommendations that we go from a more dense to a less dense as we migrate towards the end of the property. The point here is let's take a holistic approach and let's use it in the whole development. Establish minimum and maximum lot sizes. We talked about excluding the areas that we talked about. And another comment is minimize or eliminate the use of planned residential development overlay, the PRD, when the application has a negative impact on minimum lot sizes and increases the density. And finally, if we can agree on some safeguards as a team, then we shouldn't probably be taking a vote and making a recommendation, because what we have today is fairly open-ended. We like to put some guardrails on it. So I put together a little example. And if we look at the example on the left, we've got a 25-acre site, and we've got 1 house per acre. And based on our number on top of our original recommendation, that's kind of what I think some of us are thinking. But then if you go to the second example, you've still got 25 acres. You've still got 1 house per acre average, but within that 25 acres, we've now got 2 houses per usable acre, and we, in effect, double the density. For instance, if we use the proposal, we've got some non-residential buildings, whether it be churches, schools, whatever. We may have a creek or a environmental issue running through the middle of the property. We may have a couple of retention basins. We may have a little area set aside for a park, and we may have a bike path. Well, if you subtract all of those out, and you only build in the areas that are left, that's where the PRD can have a significant impact on density. So my comment here is if we could go back to the original, or to the marked up proposal, we talk about a lot width of a minimum of 90 feet. We talk about a lot depth of 165 feet for a minimum. That minimum lot size translates to 15,000 square foot lot divided by an acre. You're basically looking at a density at that point of 3 homes per acre, substantially different than the original 1 acre that we talked about. And if in fact you apply the PRD to that, that number can substantially increase as well. So my only comment to the group is, when we're looking at density, how best do we measure it? How do we control it? And how do we put some safeguards in place to make sure that we don't end up with 7,500 square foot lots in this transition area? Thank you.
It's the following process, that somebody make a motion to approve the Neighborhood Edge Transition District and second it to get it onto the agenda. And then that would leave the, as we have you, as you have the discussion, you can make the appropriate amendments to that bring in the ideas and your comments. Is that? No?
No, because you're asking us to take a vote on something which we don't know what we're voting on yet. That's kind of the point of Dan's discussion, I think.
I'm not asking for a vote. Just did it on the table for discussion.
Okay, I make a motion to discuss. Is that what you're looking for?
You can. I'm suggesting it might be more expeditious to have the proposal. You already have the
It's an
proposal.
agenda item, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Already have the proposal. It's just simpler from a parliamentary standpoint to have it, okay, we're going to take action on it. So it's on the record, you're debating the motion. That way, if there's something that you agree needs to be changed about it, then you can make a motion to amend, and you're not taking a final vote on the motion as amended until the end of the discussion. If you have a discussion, you don't need to circle back and go through that process again.
I think it's important for us to note, though, that these are really two pretty different proposals, and so it's difficult to say we're going to amend at the margin, because
But that's why I was
hearing it
asking the
correctly,
proposal whether that would fit.
Right, just to finish my
Yeah,
point. If I'm hearing it correctly, this would be major surgery on the first proposal. In other words, it's not changing at the margin. It's substantially and philosophically changing. So I guess what I'm saying is, what's the best way of addressing that? Do we address this as a discussion of the two proposals side by side? Or I guess to Vicky's point, if we put this on, if we put the first one on, then we're going to end up voting yes or no, up or down, because I think it's so substantial, it's going to be hard to amend it.
And again, I was looking for your judgment as whether or not these are minor changes or whether they're major. You're arguing that they are major changes.
That's what I'm speaking to, yes.
So another process is to go and not have as an emotion, have a discussion and give the department at the benefit of that discussion another month to then make appropriate revisions based upon your discussion and bring a single motion back or a single plan back to you?
I would make a motion to have that motion.
That, we don't need that as a motion. Can we do that by consensus? So tonight, you're going to have a discussion of both approaches. That's fine. The floor is open for discussion. Yes, Mr. Kurtz.
I have a couple of questions, I guess, of Joe. The first is grammatical. If I understand this, the density is not to exceed 0.75 to 1 acre per unit. That's not what this says. But you understand what I just said to you?
Yes, sir.
But this says 0.75 to 1 unit, 3/4 of a unit to 1 unit per acre. But that's not what it is.
It's preferable to be, the intended outcome would be 1 unit or 1.5. I don't know. Basically want 2 lots per every 3 acres, so to speak. That's the outcome I believe the team wanted, that it would be less dense than 1 acre.
I agree with all that. I just don't think that actually says that. At least it doesn't to me.
And I agree, it's confusing, and let Kathy and I take a look at it and see if we can make it more readable and understandable.
And then I have my second question, may I?
Sure.
About the 2 versions of a proposal here. His discussion about environmental protection, stormwater management, blah, 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 that makes some sense to me. But I am assuming that you've outlined parameters for this proposed neighborhood edge transition district that are similar in structure to what you have for your other categories. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So the other categories don't go into all the detail that the second proposal does.
Typically not.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you, because you're, in my mind, the expert on everything. So
You are completely incorrect.
So, Kathy too, though. Yeah. So, one of the things that I'm concerned is, I appreciate, first of all, thank you, Dan, for taking the time to come up with another example for us and to have the ending drawing to show us what a PRD can do to a property. So, one of my concerns personally is that if we have a PRD, in a perfect world with this neighborhood, extra qualification would be that we don't have more than 1 house per acre or no more than 2 houses per 3 acres, right? That's what we were trying to get at. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
But also it would be that if we were going to use a PRD, I don't know if it's this way in other zonings or not, but I don't think personally that I would like for them to be able to use stormwater detention, retention areas as part of usable land when they do their calculations for that stuff, because it's not usable, in my opinion. I mean, it's, when you talk to the people that live over at the Villages of Brightleaf, we had that come in front of us, that some of those detention places were just nothing but mosquito, and they weren't real happy with that. So I don't want that to be, in my mind, I don't want that to be able to be used as usable land space if that's going to be required in a PRD. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. What I think you're describing is that the stormwater management facilities serve a primary purpose, and that is not typically intended for active public space or development purposes of additional single-family dwellings.
Right. So in those lots that we looked at, that we were, I'm just going to use the area, the lot number 3 that we were considering on maybe adding to the town center, the number 3 one over by Pond Road, just as an example. That looked, when we went and looked at that, it looked for the most part relatively flat. But if my memory serves, didn't the back edge of that kind of slope down, that property slope way down? Or did it go up? There was a slope back in the woods, right, on number 3?
Yes, the northeast corner of that larger tract, the 32-acre site, it slopes toward Bonham Creek. So
okay.
it has the center area is relatively flat, which is primarily the ridge, but all other portions either slope to the northeast or east, or to a certain degree to the northwest.
So if we use that as an example, with the proposal that Dan was talking about, if ideally we wanted it, as a collective group wanted it, let's just say for the sake of this example, 1 house per acre, and then you applied a PRD to that area, how would that affect it? Would it cluster then the houses then in the center, right? So away from Bonham Creek.
Yes, if Kathy could go back to that graphic that Mr. Roughton prepared of the tic-tac-toe, maybe. So the graphic is accurate in many regards, but in each instance, assuming that the square is 25 acres and the underlying zoning, which establishes the density, not the PRD. So in this instance, what we would be saying in the neighborhood edge transition, that the allowable zoning districts that can be considered, the zoning districts, not the regulating plan land use designation, would be R1, 1 acre, or NU, 3 acre. So again, if this was 25 acres, relatively speaking, they could do 25 homes. Over here, it's 25 acres. It's designated R1, 1 acre resident district. They could do 25 homes. What we typically do, instead of having the landscape, the rain cloud, the park bench, the bicyclist scattered about within the project, we cluster the homes in the most developable and suitable area based upon the resource protection analysis, and then the remainder becomes either passive or active open space to the benefit of the homeowners. So we don't necessarily, the graphic's accurate, but it's just we cluster things. The greater the contiguousness of the unused area, the better it is for all parties. But again, the key point is the PRD doesn't set the density. It's the underlying zoning that would be authorized by the Neighborhood Edge Transition District, which under your direction from the last meeting would be either at the maximum R1 1 acre or NU 3 acre.
Vince, and then Niles, then Dan.
Kathy, you had indicated in your email you had the department had some concerns about property rights under the proposal, and we're going to see a clarification. Were you able to?
Yes, I talked to City Attorney John Young because, again, the items I identified, environmental protection, stormwater management, and the design principles of new urbanism, they're, for all intents and purposes, in black and white. We have the natural resource protection standards, the grading code, the tree preservation and restoration code, etc. Basically to say to a developer, you come in, here's our environmental protections, here's how we apply them, here they are in black and white. You go to MSD, you get the same thing for stormwater management, and then you have our town center plan for the design principles. There's a prescription, there is a recipe, and the recipe has been put down in writing. It's been adopted by the Planning and Zoning Commission, endorsed and verified, or endorsed and ratified by City Council. The concern that Kathy and I had is that we still talk about environmental protections. We also still talk about stormwater management, but then there's that other option of non-residential uses being part of the deduction. And typically, we wouldn't see that. There's not many residential proposals that include an institutional use as part of it. Institutional uses have to occur on larger tracts of land just by their nature. So there's just some concerns that we didn't have the science behind us to ensure that whatever we gave to a property owner or a developer, they would be able to understand what our expectations are as a city. I will say that Attorney Young did say it's a gray area. So if the team feels strongly that Mr. Roughton's approach is preferable, he didn't say it was something you shouldn't do. He just says it's a gray area, and most courts will side with the city on their zoning logic.
Thank you.
Niles, Terry, and then Dan.
I take it that, like your proposal, Dan, just to clarify, is you're looking more at the lot size versus density, right? Like you're wanting the homes to be spread out more than clustering?
Correct, and I think, Joe, you could help us here. help me understand, if we could go back to the proposal, doesn't matter which one.
Thank you, Kathy.
We talk about, let's just for talking purposes say we all agree on 1 house per acre. But then we drop down in the proposal and you show a minimum lot width of 90 feet and a minimum depth of 165 feet. So in one sentence, we're saying we're not going to have a density greater than 1 house per acre. But halfway down the document, we talk about a lot size that's 1/3 of an acre. And please help us understand the difference between those two nomenclatures.
I think the underlying assumption relative to zoning designation and the overlay district is that regardless of the site you find in Wildwood, there are prohibitive or restrictive characteristics associated with it. So the intent isn't to, in sort of a rear alley way, reduce density when it's just for the reduction of density. The intent is to, for the most part, to allow the PRD to not necessarily always reach the maximum density under the underlying zoning, but to allow for reasonable application of the request onto the property. So I guess what I'm not saying that very well, and I apologize. Let me try again, maybe more succinctly and briefly. The benefit to the PRD is that it requires, and there are regulations, to put the development on the best location possible. And oftentimes that area is not as large as one would like. And so if we require larger lots, inevitably what we end up doing is having to grade and disturb more of the site to manage stormwater, which is a key component which leads to a lot of the site disturbance you see. And so the idea is that you don't increase the density, you allow the lots to become smaller to take advantage of the usable area of the property and leave the rest undisturbed.
Or you use smaller lots, or you use larger lots and less lots. So
Yes.
a very simple question in my simple mind. Is there a way for this team to specify a minimum lot size, period?
You betcha. You could put in the neighborhood edge transition that no lot be approved at a size less than 22,000, 30,000, 45,000, whatever you should choose. What then would happen is we would go in and modify the widths, the depths, the block perimeter, and for the most part, the setbacks are pretty consistent across the board. We always require a pretty substantial area for the rear, less on the side, and then thereafter the front could be.
And I think that's something we all can get our arms around and discuss. I would propose that we talk about that. We all agree that we would like to see a minimum lot size for this zoning.
I have Terry, Dan again, Deborah, and Vicky.
Joe, I'm on 3.5 acres down off Old State Road. I do not have stormwater detention or retention. At what density does MSD require it? I mean, does this have to have it, or are these just, the density is low enough that, you know, you get runoff and it soaks into the ground?
You were fortunate that your subdivision was platted prior to MSD accepting jurisdictional responsibility in this portion of West St. Louis County. But I will tell you now, if you were to submit your subdivision to the city of Wildwood, we would require stormwater management. We had a lady that lives on Woods Road here last night that explained that she lives next to Rockwoods Reservation. Her next neighbor, her closest neighbor residentially is Bartizan Point, 3-acre plus lots. And she was an island in her house based upon the amount of water we're getting. We require stormwater management on all projects now.
That'd be a little difficult in Old State Farms because all the properties like that.
And I understand, and what we're talking about under the Watershed Erosion Task Force, another group of volunteers, is actually having not large facilities, but small facilities associated with each individual home. Some type of cistern, rain garden, soils, I can't think of the name of them, that slips me, but
French drain.
Yep.
Something like that.
exactly, trying to keep the stormwater that's generated on the property onto the property itself.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, did you have enough adequate time after your comments following Niles?
I interrupted Niles. Niles, if you'd like to.
No, actually, Deborah's next in line. I was
I'm
going,
sorry.
you were next in line originally, then you jumped the line. That's fine.
Sorry.
Deborah?
Okay, so here's my thoughts. I think we should have, in the neighborhood edge transition district, a lot size no less than an acre, which would then transition up to the 3 acres at 1.5 acre. That the detention and the retention pond not be taken into the layout so that you lessen the 1 to 1.5 acres lots. And that you can have protected areas and still keep the 1 acre to 1.5 acre lots, but no PRD.
Vicki?
Yeah, go ahead. Get me. Come back.
Others? Lindsay?
I have a very quick question. Joe,
Yes, ma'am.
if the PRD is not allowed, do you see people trying to develop areas of the site that they would otherwise not develop on? In other words, disturb larger portions of the site in an effort to make the project more financially viable?
That's what we've seen in the past.
So in effect, by requiring the large lot sizes, you could in fact increase site disturbance.
Yes, and this isn't me saying this. When the city incorporated, it engaged a gentleman named Jonathan Barnett. At the time, he was the chair of the urban design chair of the urban design department at NYU. Went on to Penn, has a consulting firm, internationally known, and he basically said the PRD basically is more environmentally friendly. I know people don't like to see smaller lots in the non-urban area. We had a long discussion about that several years ago. But frankly, if you look at the research, and we did the research, if you disturb less of a site, keep the undisturbed portion contiguous, it's better for stormwater management, environmental quality, wildlife, and habitat. And so from the perspective of the department, and I've argued this in rooms full of people that didn't like what I was saying, the PRD is more environmentally friendly. It's just a fact. It's not me. You can pull up, we've got research from APA that's this thick, and every community has it, and every community says the same thing. It's better for the environment.
Can I throw something else?
Sure.
Kevin?
I'm not trying to use your graphic against you. I'm just going to argue a bit of a counterpoint. No matter how you cut that square, it's 25 houses. So the property owner also has some rights. But if we're going to allow development, which I don't think anyone is arguing that we say no one can ever develop and ever build another house in town, if you allow a density of 1 home per acre, so that square, no matter how many ways we cut it, it's 25. When I look at the subdivision on the right, I don't look at those things as bad. I look at, wow, look at that great public space we just created. Look at that ephemeral drainage way and that steep slope that we just saved. We didn't even get into wildlife habitat that is preserved when we cluster homes. The utilities, the grading, the change in all of it. I mean, it's the PRD. He's argued it. I haven't stood in front of a group and made the argument in a long time, so maybe I'm a little worked up about it. But the PRD, the department for 24 years has been advocates of the PRD. We've seen it in use. We've seen videos of why the city was incorporated, and it's just devastation of land, which was what was making the squares on the left. So when we cluster them, you're still not getting more than 25 houses. The density doesn't change. The math doesn't change. So if the lot size is permitted at 90 by 165 feet, It just means that the other 2/3 of that acre are open space. I don't see where that's bad. So,
We have Deborah, Vicky, Niles, and Dan.
Okay, so I get the science, you
Yes,
know.
ma'am.
But the reality is, look across the street at Villages of Brightleaf. That there's been many problems with that, and it is too dense. And there, like they said, the detention ponds, they don't work. I don't think some of them have ever even had water in them at all. And so if we use the PRD, and the PRD was used over there,
Yes,
that's
ma'am.
what made more houses in that 75 acres. Well,
the number of homes was the same.
zoning.
Remember-
Anyway, we started out with less houses, and because we used the PRD, the density increased.
What I would say is if you want to control density, you don't zone the property R3, which is what Brightleaf is. You zone it R2, R1, or you keep it as NU. The density is what the zoning district designation is what establishes density. In the town center, the neighborhood edge allows anywhere from basically R1, 1 acre, all the way up to R4. And again, I would argue in Brightleaf, it's less dense than the surrounding development. It's less dense than West Glen Farms, Evergreen, Sandalwood.
A portion of it, I agree with that. The portion that abuts Evergreen, and some of those lots in Evergreen and then in Brightleaf are the lot size are pretty much the same thing.
Yes, ma'am.
But then as you go further east or west,
Yep.
it increases in density.
Yes.
But we've also used retention and detention as green space. We can't really use that space, but it's designated as a green space. And a development's I can't remember what the number is, but you're supposed to have so much green space per houses. And so part of that green space then is not usable. And so that's basically what I was saying. We need to have green space that's usable. You can have protected areas, but don't increase the density. I mean, you can work around the environment and protect the environment without increasing the density. But if you have a PRD, you can increase the density.
Or you can potentially manage the density to a greater extent. Same density, but you may be able to have an additional lot or X amount of lots because the PRD does allow you to cluster them on smaller sizes.
But you can protect the environment without clustering.
You certainly can. And that was one of the first major discussions of the incorporation effort. Is Wildwood just going to be non-urban resident district, 3-acre zoning? And people said, no. There are other areas where greater density can be accommodated. And town center is the location where the greatest density can be accommodated. And there's reasons for that. And I've cited those.
I'm going, one, because of the way Villages Brightleaf turned out, and two, because we've had more high-density developments, and residents over and over, they don't want any more high-density developments. I understand what the plan was, and we went with the plan, but now you have a lot of residents that they don't want any more high-density developments.
And this group, the team, can address that. Because there are neighborhood edge designated areas, there's neighborhood general designated areas, which all allow more than 1 unit per acre or 1 unit for every 3 acres. So this is the opportunity, this is the time to discuss, is town center density too great?
And that was, my opinion was, I think we need to come up with some kind of designation so that you have no less than 1 acre lot, and that it can transition into 1.5 acres, especially if it's backing up to 3 acres. But I don't think we should reduce that lot size.
Just as a matter of clarification, can we,
Lindsay, we have, you're have to stay in line, I'm sorry. We have Vicky, Niles, Dan, and then you. Let me draw the team's attention to it's 8:25, and I think you want to be able to give Joe and Kathy some guidance about how that we get from here to how you want this structured at the next meeting. Vicky?
Okay, so I agree with you, and I agree with you. So, ta-da! Okay, so I agree that this is, first of all, this transition area that we are discussing would be applied to just the 3 additional pieces that we're considering adding to town center, correct?
2.
2, yes, 2, okay. So first of all, those are the only 2 pieces of property that, as of this point, this all would apply to. So I was hesitant about these PRDs myself until they handed that book like this thick to us, and then I actually did read some of it. And they do serve a purpose. I do also agree that our purpose in having this extra district was to have a buffer. So, but if you look at the properties that we have, I think that a PRD will still serve as a buffer, because yes, Dan, I agree with the truthfulness of the designs that you showed. With these 2 properties that we're talking about, the PRD will protect those properties tremendously. And they're going from neighborhood edge and neighborhood general, right? They're going from those right up to 3 acres. So even if we say we want 1 house per acre to be the density, it may be that in order to do that, we have to cluster some of those homes in a different way. My question for you would be, are we able to legally, and I don't want to hand strap a property owner, would be to say that we want the density 1 acre, 1 house per acre, and if a PRD used, then we would like a minimum lot size for if a PRD is used. Is that something we could do?
Yes, ma'am.
Because if I remember when we talked about the property number 1, the option number 1, alternative A1, that's the one with the hill and the ridge and all the trees. And if we don't use a PRD there, there's no guaranteed protection for that property. I know everybody says nobody can build there, a builder can't build there, but nobody can say never, right? But if we have a PRD and we use it on that property, that allows us to protect that ridge and those tree lines, yes?
That was the thought when we did the tour, is that to the north end of that particular node, the terrain is fairly level, consistent with what you see in town center. But as you move to the south, it becomes very, very difficult topographically to develop, and then you can see there's more ephemeral drainage ways, there's more water issues. So the thought was use the PRD, cluster up by Grover Crossing, the development in town center, and leave the rest undisturbed and unused.
And if you look at these, so a PRD is necessary for that alternative 1 in order to protect what we want to protect. And if you look at the alternative number 3, it's multiple lots. And if you don't allow PRD use, I don't know how some of those lots are even usable or sellable without devastating the environment. So,
as long as you don't end up with any less than 1 acre, 1 house per acre, or 1 house per acre.
So my question to the city would be, and I also had one more question regarding alternative 3. My question to the city would be, is there a way that we could do a PRD that stated it? I know we're not doing a PRD right now, but is there a way that you could word this such that we say we want the density to be no more than 1 house per acre, but that if a PRD is used, that a minimum lot size is developed so that if they have to do 2 houses per 3 acres or whatever, could we do that?
If the majority of the team members support that, Kathy
But
and
I mean,
I'll
legally,
figure-
that's something that could be done?
Yes.
Okay, so I have one more question on this alternative 3, since we're all sitting here. with this new district, we have a church and we have that dog kennel place there. And maybe I'm misreading. Did I not see those addressed in this? How would those be affected by this new district?
The new district would.
Thank you.
The new district would further the development of the larger vacant tract of land, which is now limited to 1 unit per 3 acres, but again, provide a transition between the existing town center boundary, the reserve, and the potential use of the reserve, and also provide a transition between the church, the CUP for the private dog park, and so all in all, the PRD offers an opportunity to use the best part of the larger site, and from that perspective is a benefit.
So we have next Niles, and then I'll seek your guidance of when you want to adjourn. Niles?
Currently, the owner could do a PRD right now, right, and get about 13 homes in there.
In the non-urban, yes.
In the non-urban, and then under this proposal, it would take that up to 30 homes, give or take, density-wise, correct?
Potentially, we would see either almost a doubling of the density, if not a little bit more.
Okay, and then how big is the other lot, the west of 109?
The one in the center in the depiction of alternative A3, that is about 33 acres.
About the same?
Yeah.
Okay. And then if you split the difference, I guess you could go a half unit per acre, and then you'd be somewhere around 20 homes for...
Yes. So if we allowed 1.5 units per every 3 acres, hopefully I'm saying that right. Basically what we're saying is 2 units per every 3 acres, then yes, you would basically reduce it by that percentage.
Okay. I'm not interested in adding to the size of town center at all, but if you were going to do this neighborhood edge transition district, I would still reduce the density down and keep the PRD because it is a useful tool, but just as much as you could kick down the density. So I would make a motion to have the neighborhood edge transition district be a half unit per acre.
Dan?
Yeah,
Is
real
there
quick, and I appreciate.
I don't know if anybody wants a second or not, but
It was my understanding that you wanted to save the making of motions until to the next meeting.
That's fine.
Until
That's
you have
fine.
the whole document
Sure.
to deal with.
Yep.
Okay, real quick.
So there's nothing on the table. Yes.
Okay, real quick. We have a parks or planning and parks department. And Joe, you spend hours researching with your staff, making recommendations to planning and zoning. We have a planning and zoning committee that takes those recommendations and makes decisions. So if we come up with a minimum lot size, and I'm not stating what size it should be, but if we say it's going to be 1 house per acre, Joe's and his team's going to take a look at that property. He's going to look at the environmental issues. He's going to look at the stormwater runoff. He's going to look at anything else we want to do there, and he's going to make a recommendation based on his knowledge and based on preserving the environment, how many lots will fit in that space and where they should go. And that will be balanced against a builder's proposal. And we do that today. We do that every single time somebody proposes something. Joe makes a report. He says his group recommends it. Our builder wants 100. Joe says, looks like it maybe should be 80, and we have a discussion, and planning and zoning votes on it. So to me, I don't see a minimum lot size as a deterrent, and it cannot be worked around. I think it's our job to say, okay, if it's an acre, then 50 lots fit. And I think we've got the horsepower in the city to make that decision. Thank you.
Lindsay?
My only comment was a request to everybody that as we do the discussion tonight and as we continue next week, to please be very clear if you're talking about density for the site, as in the zoning, or whether you're talking about minimum lot size, particularly as we get into the PRD discussion. I think it will help prevent a lot of confusion as we go through, since density is not necessarily reflective of lot size.
Thank you. Ray?
Yeah, it's getting late, so I'll be brief. And my comment was going to be very similar to what Lindsay said. I think we're conflating a couple of things, lot size and density. And doing that, there's a danger it creates confusion. But where I thought we keep going was to say, not drop PRD per se, but recognize, and I would turn to Dan since it's his counter, but recognize as long as we can establish a minimum lot size and be respecters of that, and then rely, to the extent it's possible, on staff to work around the PRD process to make sure that we're not doing environmental damage. I draw our attention to 1A, where we said there was that steep slope. Only a portion of that was developable. So we would say that really the other pieces of that aren't developable, but that we're not going to compromise by increasing the density in those areas that are. So, and as I listen to all this discussion, I think that's where it comes to really favoring that kind of a thing. Or we're saying we're going to provide a lot more latitude and basically take it off our plate. So I think those are the two issues.
I guess
I'm going to turn to the chair to ask about where we go from here.
From the discussion we've had, were we able to glean, or were you able to receive any direction on what you think our intent is or our concerns are?
Well, as Ms. Marion mentioned, there's been a lot of interchangeable discussion about density and minimum lot size and just the zoning versus land use designation. But out of that, I think there is an overwhelming desire to ensure that density is managed to a minimum increase in the neighborhood transition district, that there should be a minimum lot size and it should be greater than 15,000 square feet, and that the PRD probably needs a little bit better wording in association with the district as it is presented today. So I think between Kathy and I, we can come back with something that's closer to what we reflected in tonight's discussion.
Is that acceptable to the team?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Is any other discussions? First of all, there's a second public forum. Is there anybody who wished to?
I apologize to the representatives from Payne Family Homes and the Reserve. Obviously, we had high hopes that we would conclude some other discussions tonight and be able to have that on the agenda. Without an objection of the chair, that will return on the October agenda.
And I think what we should do perhaps prior to that is assess our agenda and what we anticipate and give them a realistic time frame of when we will be addressing it. I wish I could tell you definitively we'll be there next time, but I don't know that I can do that yet, but perhaps. I don't want to be in the agenda if we know we're just not going to get there. And I think some of the things that we have wonderful discussion, important discussion, but I don't think it's fair to them to have to. They're always welcome, don't get me wrong. But
You're absolutely correct, Mr. Chair, and I think your comment was insightful. Let us probably say at the earliest it would be November.
Michael?
Joe and Kathy, I have some language I would like to present for the permitted land uses, where you say uses at density not to exceed. I would like for you to consider 1 unit per acre or 2 units within 3 contiguous acres with the PRD development.
Other team members have any comments for each other or for Kathy and Joe? Vicki?
I just want to clarify, or maybe you could clarify, a PRD cannot add houses to a thing. It can actually cause a smaller density. It cannot add to the density.
Yes. What establishes density is the zoning designation. The PRG, in principle, allows that density to be placed in the best location on the lot.
Any other team member comments? Yes.
I just gonna motion to adjourn.
Second? Adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it.